Welcome back to another FPL video. Today we're talking about the transfer tips ahead of Double Gameweek 23. Let me know if you disagree or agree with any of these picks, and be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel. We're trying to get to 18,000 subscribers, reaching new goals. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a single upload. And we're going to get straight into this video with 12 players to buy, hold, sell and skip. I discussed them just a few weeks ago. Martin Odegaard remains a buy despite a poor performance against Everton, and to be fair, the whole Arsenal team, with the exception of Gabriel at the back, were very poor, and Odegaard hasn't really set up the world alight in the last few game weeks, but I still believe he's one of the best midfielders to own for Double Gameweek 23 and Blank Gameweek 25, where we won't have these Man United, Brighton, Newcastle and Brentford assets at our disposal. Odegaard's underlying numbers aren't particularly great, but they are actually significantly better than Bukayo Saka's, and I don't think either of them are, the most impressive in terms of the underlying numbers, but they still are pretty decent in the grand scheme of things, and they are getting, more importantly, the FPL points. And Odegaard has been one of the best players in the Premier League since the World Cup, and also over the course of the season. He has been very consistent. Only Rashford has scored more points than him, and he is one of 4 players in Game Week 23 so far to have been transferred in by over 100,000 managers. And of course that will change. There will be multiple players that will have so much transfers in and activity, but Odegaard will be one of the most sought out after players in Game Week 23. Those that don't have him will be looking to get him into their teams, and I've constantly asked, who do I go for, Odegaard or Bukayo Saka? And I think it's a very close call, but as I said a few weeks ago, I would lean a little bit more towards Martin Odegaard, because in terms of bonus points, he's got 18 compared to Bukayo Saka's 9, and that also gives Odegaard the ability to register multiple double-digit returns. Saka's only done that once this season against Liverpool, a few 9-pointers, whilst Odegaard has consistently gotten these double-digit returns, and that would be absolutely massive in a game like 23, where you could even captain him over his compatriot, Erling Haaland. Riyad Mahrez is another player who has been absolutely incredible since the restart. He has blanked twice in that time period, but those were against Spurs and Manchester United away, and he has that tough game against Arsenal in 23, but in that game against Aston Villa, if he does get the start, I think he could do extremely well, not to mention the fixtures afterwards, including Nottingham Forest in Game Week 24 and Bournemouth away in 25. And Man City have arguably the best fixtures until Game Week 28. According to Fantasy Football Hub, they are second, only behind Arsenal, but that is definitely down to interpretation. And I still think Mahrez is one of the best options in the game, despite being subbed off early against Spurs just before the 60th minute mark. His underlying numbers aren't that good. We looked at Odegaard, they were fairly decent, but even then nothing too spectacular. Mahrez's are even worse, but he has been getting a lot of his minutes and starts since the World Cup, which is also very important to take into account. My only concern with Mahrez and other Man City assets is the Champions League returning in a few weeks' time for the citizens, and also you've got all this background noise surrounding Man City and FFP, and also the turbulence in the team selections. Pep Guardiola hasn't been able to get that solidified 11 that Arsenal have been able to this season, and that has also caused some problems. But assuming that Mahrez continues to start, as he's one of the most informed players in the City ranks, I think he's the go-to Man City midfielder, and I would go for him over Kevin De Bruyne right now. If I had the choice of an Arsenal or Man City defender to buy this week, I would go for an Arsenal defender. I think Arsenal have been a bit more solid at the back this season. They've also got a more settled 11, and also as a consequence, a more settled back line. And my only concern with Zinchenko would be his injuries. When you compare him to Ben White, Saliba and Gabriel, Zinchenko is the most injury prone of the 4. But what he also does have over them, in my opinion, is the bonus points potential. When Arsenal win by a narrow margin, he's got more assist threat as well. And in terms of the underlying numbers, when you consider how many minutes he's played, it's actually pretty decent for a defender. Of course, nothing too great, and that's a recurring theme for a lot of the players we're discussing today. But nonetheless, Zinchenko is a really good option that's going a bit under the radar. His ownership is under 10% as well, so I'd highly consider Zinchenko, and I'd rather go for him over Nathan Ake, any Man City defender, and also potentially the other Arsenal defenders at this moment in time. Martinelli has been very frustrating in the last 4 game weeks with 4 blanks, but in terms of underlying numbers, which obviously isn't everything, he has the best of any of these Arsenal midfielders, even compared to Bukayo Saka and Odegaard. What those two have over him, though, is better form. Saka's on penalties, and Odegaard is the best in terms of bonus points and double-digit haul potential. I still like Martinelli, and as I discussed briefly in the reaction stream recently, I think he has been a bit hard done by with the tactics. So with Bukayo Saka on the right-hand side, he's able to forge connections with Ben White and also Martin Odegaard on that right-hand side. He's always got someone close by to link up the play with. With Martinelli, he's holding down the width a lot on the left-hand side. If you look at the heat map of all Arsenal players, Martinelli will be by far the most wide player in the team, so he can be isolated. You've got Zinchenko inverting as a midfielder, with Xhaka then just bombing forwards as a left attacking midfielder. But Martinelli is pretty much on his own at times, and I think he has been a bit hard done by as a result. And Trossard was very impressive against Man City and Man United, but not so much against Everton. And I think the whole Arsenal team, like I said earlier, with a few exceptions potentially, were very poor in that game as well. But I still think Martinelli has the potential. My only concern with him, and this is obviously another thing that I've been saying a lot in this video today, is the possibility of Trossard coming in. I think if Trossard was to come in for any player, it would be Martinelli dropping out, with Trossard being more of a natural left winger. So that is something to definitely be concerned about. But assuming Martinelli starts, I think he has a really good chance of scoring against Brentford and even possibly Man City. But I'm looking at that Brentford fixture, and I think if he starts, I think he'll get a return finally for the first time in quite a long while as well. But I would back Martinelli and hold him. The only way I would sell him potentially is if you are going to burn a free transfer. You don't want to do that, and you can maybe move to Saka, Odegaard, or Riyad Mahrez for free. Kevin De Bruyne was one of the very best assets in the game until Game Week 16, but since the restart, I have to say, only 2 returns there with 2 assists and multiple blanks has made him quite dispensable, even in Double Gameweek 23 with Man City obviously facing Aston Villa and Arsenal, and that really plum fixture against Bournemouth away in Game Week 25. I still like him, and he has the best underlying numbers by far of any player we've covered so far in this video, and I still believe he's the 3rd or 4th best premium option in the game. But there is obviously a clear difference between Haaland and Kane and the rest of the competition, especially since Game Week 17. And I would still hold De Bruyne if you didn't make that move to Bruno Fernandes potentially in Game Week 22, or you just decide to keep De Bruyne and maybe add Bruno Fernandes another way. It doesn't really matter. I would hold De Bruyne if you still have him up until this point. For those of us that don't own a Man City midfielder, would I go for him? Potentially. I think he's still a worthwhile investment for the next 3 game weeks at least, and then you could maybe move him on to Bruno Fernandes afterwards in Game Week 26, or another midfielder that you may not have already. But I would rather go for Riyad Mahrez at the moment, and that's something I talked about when covering Mahrez at the beginning of this video. Despite a real big difference in terms of the underlying numbers, with De Bruyne clearly trumping Riyad Mahrez, but in terms of FPL points, Mahrez is the clear winner, and I think those are the only 2 midfielders I would consider from Man City. And for those of you considering a triple up, it's not a bad option. It's a mega differential in game weeks like this, but I would rather go for 2 Man City midfielders, or attackers so to speak, with Haaland, De Bruyne / Mahrez, and then a defender like Nathan Ake. But at this moment in time, I have to say I'm probably leaning more towards having a double up in Man City and not going all the way with a triple up, because quite frankly there are too many issues in the team at the moment, so much rotation, and De Bruyne, as we saw against Spurs, isn't safe. He was on the bench in such a crucial game, came on late on. I would expect him to start both games in the double and also start in the games afterwards, but you've also got the Champions League coming into the mix, and that could really shake things up and make De Bruyne even worse of an FPL asset than he already is at the moment. Harry Kane is the 2nd highest scoring player in FPL this season. It's very close between him and Trippier for 2nd spot behind Erling Haaland. He's got some fantastic underlying numbers, which are even better than Kevin De Bruyne's, which we showed just now. And you look at the big chances, the XG, the amount of shots, and also, more importantly, the goals and assists. He's got 22 goal contributions in 22 games, playing in a rather inconsistent Spurs team, still leading the line. And Spurs now have a really good fixture run until game week 30, and that makes him a really good long-term investment. For those of you that don't have him, I would still recommend buying him even in Game Week 23, where we've got all these double game week assets like Nketiah potentially up front. I would still rather go for Harry Kane, facing his favourite opponent in Leicester. He's got an incredible record against them, not to mention the games afterwards. He doesn't blank in Game Week 25. I think there's so much to like with Harry Kane, and I would definitely go for him. He's got absolutely everything. He's got the returns, he's got the numbers, he's got absolutely everything that you need in a striker. And the reason why I'm mentioning yet again, it seems very simple, is because some managers are considering selling him to Nketiah still. And I said this last week, I wouldn't do that for a hit. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Kane outscored Nketiah in Game Week 22. It happened, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happened again in 23. I genuinely think Kane could outscore every single kind of big option this week, even potentially Erling Haaland, although I think that might be a step too far in Game Week 23. But nonetheless, I would keep Harry Kane. If you don't have him, I would even consider buying him this week, despite all the double game week options at your disposal. Chelsea are about to enter a good period of fixtures, but the main targets I really want to go for there are Kepa Arrizabalaga, who's the best goalkeeper in the game right now, and also potentially another defender like Badiashile. In terms of the attackers, the only ones I would really consider include Mudryk and Joao Felix. Mason Mount hasn't been at it for quite some time. He could be on penalty kicks, but that isn't enough for me to really recommend him in FPL. And when you've got Odegaard, Saka, even Martinelli, Riyad Mahrez, Matoma, Bruno Fernandes, Rashford, not to mention all the other midfielders you can go for like Kevin De Bruyne. I just don't think there's a space for a Chelsea midfielder. And, you know, as much as I think Mudryk is an exciting talent, I wouldn't really go for him, let alone Mason Mount, who's been off form for quite some while. And the underlying numbers don't really point towards an improvement in this situation anytime soon. So I talked about selling Mason Mount a few weeks ago. I maintain the same belief. I know his ownership isn't that high, around only 5.4%. But nonetheless, if you do have a midfielder like Mason Mount, I would genuinely consider selling him. I think it's a very easy switch. I see some people still asking me, should I sell Mason Mount in Game Week 23 heading into this upcoming deadline? And I'm going to say the same thing. I would definitely sell him, even if Chelsea are about to enter a good period of fixtures. I would not be surprised if Almiron produced a massive return in Game Week 23. So for those of you considering to keep him for one more week, then offload him in Game Week 24, I think that's a fairly decent call, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But there are multiple reasons why I think it's a good time to sell him even now in 23. One are the poor underlying stats, which don't really point towards anything sustainable and long term. More importantly, though, he had that really good purple patch between Game Weeks 9 and 17, and I do believe the World Cup has disrupted his momentum and rhythm. He actually scored on his first game back from the World Cup, but after that, since, he hasn't produced a return since Game Week 17, and we're still waiting for something from Almiron. I think he could do it in 23, like I said, but I don't think that's enough reason to keep him, because even if he does produce a goal, I still think someone like Odegaard or Saka could easily outscore him in 23, not to mention over the next 3, 5 or 8 game weeks. And I think there's so many other midfielders that you can try to fit in. You've got Matoma, who seems like the new Almiron, so to speak, who is looking incredible, and I think his run is maybe a bit more sustainable for the time being anyway. So with Miguel Almiron, I think I would sell him, whether it's now in 23 or going into Game Week 24. And he's still one of the highest scoring midfielders and players in the game. But with Newcastle assets, offensively, they aren't really filling me with confidence. The defenders is what I really want to go for. Nick Pope in goal, Trippier, Botman, Sherburn, you name it. I'm not really too fond of the attackers. That includes Isak when he's fit, Callum Wilson, Miguel Almiron himself. So let me know your thoughts if you still own Almiron. Are you going to keep him for one more week, then sell him? Are you going to offload him for a Saka, Odegaard, Mahrez, or maybe another midfielder we've discussed today or in recent videos? Be sure to let me know, but I genuinely think he's a sell and his time is up. Let's wait and see if that ends up ringing true. Liverpool have a fairly decent fixture run until Game Week 28, and they could even have a double added to Game Week 26 or 27, which could maybe catapult them to the top 3 in terms of the fixture ticker on any site that you may use. And Darwin Núñez has some exceptional underlying numbers, the XG, the big chances in particular, but he just doesn't convert enough of these. He gets into some really good positions. He can be a nuisance to opposition defenders, but he doesn't make the most of these opportunities. I'm actually very surprised that I got rid of Callum Wilson for Darwin Núñez, I think in Game Week 16, just before the break, and he was absolutely exceptional. It was one of the best transfers I've made all season, but he's not someone I would trust to have beyond a certain game week. He's a decent one-week punt that could really turn out well, but in most cases, I just don't really have the sensation that he's going to produce something. And if I were to go for any Liverpool asset, it probably would still be Salah, despite him being vastly overpriced at the moment. So with Liverpool assets, I would still consider selling them, not going for them for the time being. If they have a confirmed double in 26 or 27, then I could maybe add one, possibly two of these assets. Liverpool obviously don't blank in 25 as well, which is a huge plus, and they also are out of the FA Cup, which could bode well for future blank game weeks too. But genuinely, I would sell Darwin Nunez. I'm seeing some people thinking of getting him in right now for certain strikers like Mitrovic. I just don't really see the need to go for something like that unless you're absolutely convinced that Darwin Nunez will suddenly start banging in the goals and that Liverpool will start being a functional team again. I don't see either situation happening for the time being, or at least for the foreseeable future. So right now, I would sell Darwin Nunez, avoid all Liverpool assets until we have some confirmed doubles. We are now in the final section of this video with the first skip in Reece James. I was not at all surprised to see him get a 1-pointer being subbed off just before the 60th minute mark upon his return in Game Week 22 to the starting lineup. And that kind of sums up Reece James. He can produce these 18 pointers with a goal, assist and clean sheet. He can also come off for a 1-pointer just before the 60th minute. He can get injured and give you a 0-pointer with a yellow card and then be injured for a long period of time. And that is my main concern with Reece James. He's far too injury prone and his minutes are always going to be managed, especially when he just comes back from an injury. I do hope he can stay fit because he could generally become one of the best defenders in FPL with such a high ceiling, with so many avenues for points. But for the time being, why not go for Kepa in goal or Badiashile, who will probably get the 90 minutes every single game. He's not in the Champions League squad and he could get his minutes and opportunities in the Premier League to develop, as Chelsea will probably write off the Premier League season a little bit. Obviously, they are improving and they're looking very solid defensively, so I can see why there is a clamour to go for Reece James. But ultimately, I wouldn't go for him. He's far too much of a risk. And whilst his ownership being so low can be very attractive and you want to find ways to claw back rank, I think there are better defenders to achieve that. And you also need to bear in mind someone who's going to be nailed on to starting Game Week 25, where you're already going to be a bit light, maybe if you have a lot of Man United and Newcastle assets, not to mention Brighton and Brentford. So it's really important to have these kind of nailed on players who are going to get the 90 minutes and not run any risk of being subbed off early. I've seen a lot of Enzo Fernandez over the last year for River Plate, for Benfica in the Champions League, and not to mention Argentina at the World Cup. And he's going to play a similar role, it seems like, at Chelsea for the time being, whilst all these players like Kante are still injured, as this lone six defensive midfielder. And that does limit his capabilities of getting goals and assists, because he can play as a number 8 and be a box-to-box midfielder, an all-action one with long shots which he can score from. He could also sometimes make late runs into the box and be an all-rounder in essence, but I just don't see that happening right now, especially with Chelsea struggling for creativity and goals. I think Enzo can make some key passes. He's already made one on his debut against Fulham, but you look at the amount of shots he's going to take. I just think he's going to be severely limited with the environment he has, with the surrounding players who I think are in some cases lacking quality, but not to mention I think the role he's going to play is going to really limit him right now. And I will just wait until maybe some other key players are back, like Kovacic and Kante, and if Enzo is pushed further forward, that's when he could generally become an FPL option. But right now, I just don't see it, and if you want a midfielder or forward, go for Mudryk or Joao Felix. The final player to wrap up this video is Ederson, the only double game week player that I've put here to skip. Now, I don't think he's a bad option. I can see why people are going for him. There could be a clean sheet there at home to Aston Villa, not to mention that plum fiction 25, even Nottingham Forest away isn't too bad in 24, but Ederson is just an enigma for me because he can get these 6 or even 7 pointers on odd occasion, but he doesn't have a high ceiling. He doesn't get too many bonus points. He doesn't make many saves, and ultimately Man City aren't keeping that many clean sheets anyway. So I definitely wouldn't be taking a hit to get a goalkeeper transfer in, going from De Gea to Ederson, and I even wouldn't do it for free, to be fair. Not right now. Maybe you could do it in 25 when he faces Bournemouth, but I just don't really see the appeal of covering Man City with Ederson. I'd actually rather go for Riyad Mahrez in the midfield or De Bruyne, not to mention Erling Haaland, who's obviously going to be in all of our teams, and not to mention maybe someone like Ake as well, because you may be short in the defenders. You want to get to 4 or 5 defenders, and you would rather go for a Man City defender there instead of going for a goalkeeper when you could just play Ward or maybe go for a Kepa for the long term. And beyond blank game week 25, you've also got Nick Pope and Raya, who are 2 of the best goalkeepers in the game as well. But when you've got Kepa, who scored 44 points since the World Cup, the most of any goalkeeper. He's getting bonus points and saves galore. Why go for Edison? That's just the way I see it. I know he faces Bournemouth and he'll probably outscore Kepa in Game Week 25, but what about the game weeks before and afterwards? I actually think Kepa could keep up with Edison or even outscore him, actually. And you look at these underlying numbers there for Man City defensively, they've maybe been a bit unlucky not to get more clean sheets. They haven't been too shabby, not considering that many shots or big chances, so to speak, but it's also actually a downgrade from previous seasons where Man City were more solid defensively, had a settled back line, and it was very difficult to score goals past them. And right now, I think they're a bit weak in certain games, and they can be a bit more vulnerable as they were maybe in years gone by. So with Edison, I would skip him, and I'd rather go for Man City attackers if anything. And if you want a defensive coverage, I'd rather go for a defender like Ake. So there we have it, 12 players to buy, hold, sell and skip. Let me know if you disagree or agree with any of the selections and the reasons why. I'd be happy to debate these in the comment section down below. And thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, you know what to do. Smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's try to get this video to over 300 likes. Let's keep on pushing towards 18,000 subscribers. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and you can also become a patron or a channel member. Patreon.com/DylanRCM. You can become a patron or channel member for as little as £3 per month. So consider doing that. It really helps out the channel. And thank you to all those that have sent in super chats, become channel members and patrons, and all of that good stuff. Thank you to all the subscribers who keep on building this channel from the ground up. You can also check the Discord server and the FPL League. The link's on the description below. And keep an eye out for UCL Fantasy content. There'll be a team selection video out very soon. I've already got a latest draft video out on the channel. And there'll be a deadline stream, a return to deadline streams for UCL Fantasy next week, the 14th of February. I'm looking forward to that one for sure. Not to mention all the FPL streams we've also got coming up, like the deadline stream on Saturday. So take care, enjoy the football. I wish you the best of luck as always, and I'll see you next time.